People talk about how they caught their partners cheating in all sorts of dramatic ways, finding texts, stumbling upon emails, or walking in at the wrong time, but me? I wasn't even looking. It was just a regular day until it wasn't tea. I was supposed to be at work, but I decided to take a half day to surprise my wife, Sarah, with lunch. We had been married for 6 years, no kids, just the two of us building what I thought was a pretty solid life together. As I drove into town, I spotted her car parked outside this cozy little cafe we used to go to on dates. My heart did this weird little flip, half excitement, half nostalgia. I thought maybe she had the same idea and we'd have a cute, spontaneous lunch together. But as I got closer, I noticed she wasn't alone. There she was, sitting by the window, laughing in that way she hadn't laughed with me in months. And across from her was a guy I instantly recognized, her ex, David. My stomach dropped, but I told myself to stay calm, that maybe it was innocent, just an old friend catching up. But then, they stood up to leave, and I saw her reach for his hand. I felt like I was hit by a truck. I didn't move, didn't even breathe as I watched them walk out together. And then, she did something that made my blood run cold. She leaned in and kissed him. Not a friendly peck on the cheek, but a deep, lingering kiss. As she walked to her car, she took off her wedding ring and placed it on the console, like it was just some accessory she didn't need anymore. That was it. I snapped out of my daze and stormed over to the car. I don't know what I was thinking, but I yanked open the door, grabbed the ring, and pocketed it. I guess I thought it would hurt her later when she noticed it missing, but as I stood there, something inside me shifted. I wasn't just angry, I was determined. She wanted to take off the ring? Fine, but she wasn't the only one who could make bold moves. I knew what I had to do next. You see, catching her like that wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. And trust me, things were about to get a whole lot more interesting. I drove home with her ring in my pocket, my mind racing a mile a minute. I kept replaying the scene over and over, feeling that pit in my stomach grow deeper each time. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I had gone from shock to rage. There was no way I was letting this slide. She wasn't going to get away with it, not without facing me first. I didn't have to wait long. About an hour later, I heard her car pull into the driveway. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched her through the window. She stepped out of the car, her expression distant, almost relieved. The sight of her looking so calm and collected after what she'd just done ignited something in me. As soon as she walked through the door, I was standing there in the living room, arms crossed, waiting for her to explain herself. She froze, probably sensing that something was off. "Hey," she said, her voice a little too casual. "You're home early." "Yeah," I replied, my tone icy. "Thought I'd surprise you." The way her face paled told me she knew something was up. She set down her purse, her eyes flickering to the left like she was trying to think of an escape route. "Is everything okay?" I couldn't help but laugh, a short, humorless sound that made her flinch. "Is everything okay?" I repeated. "You tell me, Sarah, is everything okay?" She hesitated, and for a moment I thought she might try to deny it, but then her eyes dropped to the floor and she sighed. "Rob, I don't tea," I cut her off. "Don T, you dare try to explain it away. I saw you, Sarah. I saw you with David." Her head snapped up, and the guilt was written all over her face. "Rob, I can explain." "Explain what?" I shouted, finally letting my anger out. "Explain why you were having lunch with your ex? Explain why you kissed him? Or maybe you want to explain why you took off your wedding ring and left it in the car like it meant nothing?" She didn't say anything, just stood there with tears welling up in her eyes. I pulled the ring out of my pocket and held it up. "This is what you're throwing away, Sarah. Our marriage, our life together, all for him?" Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she reached out as if trying to close the distance between us. "Rob, please. I made a mistake. It was just one time. It didn't mean anything." "One time?" I scoffed, pulling back before she could touch me. "One time, and you just happened to take off your ring and put it on the console like it was nothing?" She wiped her tears, her voice cracking. I was confused. I didn't know what I was doing. "Confused?" I repeated, shaking my head. "No, Sarah, you knew exactly what you were doing. You chose to meet him, to kiss him, to take off this ring. You made your choice, and now you are going to have to live with it. She started sobbing, pleading with me. Please, Rob, don't do this. We can work through this. I love you, love. I spat the word like it was poison. You don't love me, Sarah. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. Love doesn't do this. I could see her breaking down, but it didn't matter. I was beyond caring. Rob, I swear I'll do anything to fix this. Just please, Donda, leave me. The desperation in her voice might have moved me once, but now it just fueled my anger. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself before I spoke again. You want to fix this? I asked, my voice low and dangerous. Fine. Start by packing your things. Her sobbing grew louder as she realized what I was saying. No, Rob, please pack your things, Sarah, I repeated, my tone final. I want you out of here by the end of the day. And don't you dare think about going to him, because if you do, I promise you this will get a lot uglier. She collapsed into a chair, her face buried in her hands as she cried. I didn't feel sorry for her, not one bit. This was her mess, and she could clean it up. I turned on my heel and walked out of the room, leaving her to deal with the consequences of her betrayal. But as I headed upstairs, the ring still clutched in my hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The rest of the day passed in a blur of cold, suffocating silence. I stayed upstairs, trying to distance myself from the sound of her crying and the shuffling of her packing. Every now and then, I'd hear her move from room to room, grabbing her things, but I refused to go down and face her again. I couldn't bear to see her like that, not after what she had done. I found myself sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the wedding ring in my hand. I'd been holding it for hours, turning it over and over in my fingers, as if looking at it from every angle would somehow make sense of what had happened. But all it did was remind me of the promises she had broken, the life we were supposed to build together. The anger that had driven me earlier was starting to fade, replaced by something much worse, a deep, aching sense of loss. It hit me like a wave, knocking the wind out of me as I realized that my marriage, my life as I knew it, was falling apart. I couldn't stop thinking about how it all started so innocently, just a lunch at a cafe. How could everything go so wrong, so fast? Hours passed, but it felt like minutes when I heard a soft knock on the bedroom door. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Rob, Sarah S.'s voice came from the other side, shaky and broken. I'm done packing. I didn't move, didn't respond. I just stared at the door, willing her to go away. Please, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. Can we talk? Just for a minute. Finally, I forced myself to stand, crossing the room to the door. I opened it just a crack, enough to see her standing there, her eyes red and swollen from crying, her bags at her feet. She looked so small, so fragile, that for a brief moment, I almost let my guard down. Almost. There's nothing left to say, I said, my voice cold and emotionless. You need to go. Her eyes welled up with tears again, but she nodded, defeated. I am sorry, Rob. I know I can fix this, but I need you to know that I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't say anything. What was there to say? I just watched as she picked up her bags and slowly made her way downstairs. The sound of the front door opening and closing echoed through the house like a final goodbye. And then she was gone. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty hallway, trying to process what had just happened. It felt surreal, like I was living someone else's life. This wasn't supposed to happen to us. We were supposed to be different. Eventually, I made my way downstairs, the house feeling colder and emptier with every step. I ended up in the living room, the place where it had all come crashing down. I noticed she had left behind a framed photo of us on the mantel, taken on our honeymoon in Greece. We looked so happy, so full of life and love. I hated it. In a sudden burst of anger, I grabbed the photo and threw it across the room. The glass shattered, pieces scattering across the floor, but it didn't make me feel any better. If anything, it made me feel worse, like I was destroying the last remnants of what we had. I sank into the couch, burying my face in my hands. The silence in the house was deafening, suffocating. I never realized how much I had relied on her presence, how much she had filled the spaces in my life, and now, those spaces were empty, leaving me with nothing but my thoughts and the pain of her betrayal. But as I sat there, alone in the darkness, something shifted in me. It was like a switch flipped, and I knew I couldn't just sit here and wallow in my misery. I needed to do something, anything, to take control of the situation. And that, when an idea came to me. Something bold. Something that would force Sarah to truly understand the gravity of what she had done. If she thought she could just walk out of my life with no consequences, she was sorely mistaken. I picked up my phone, my hands shaking slightly as I scrolled through my contacts. I found the number I was looking for and hesitated for only a second before hitting call. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered on the other end. "Hello?" "David," I said, my voice steady and cold. "We need to talk, now." David's surprised silence on the other end of the line was almost satisfying. I could picture him scrambling for words, probably trying to figure out why I was calling him. After what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke. "Rob, what's this about?" "Don't play dumb, David. You know exactly what this is about," I said, my voice laced with barely controlled anger. "Meet me at the bar on Oak Street in 30 minutes. We're going to have a little chat." There was a pause, and I could hear him exhale sharply. "Rob, I don't think 30 minutes. I cut him off, my tone leaving no room for argument. "If you're not there, I'll come to your place. Your choice." I didn't wait for his response. I hung up and stared at my phone for a moment, feeling the tension in my chest build. I wasn't sure what I was planning to do when I saw him, but I knew I couldn't let this go, not without confronting him face to face. I grabbed my jacket and keys and headed out, not even bothering to lock the door behind me. The drive to the bar was a blur, my mind consumed with thoughts of Sarah and David, their betrayal, and the conversation that was about to take place. When I arrived, the bar was relatively empty, which suited me just fine. I wanted privacy, a place where I could confront David without an audience. I found a table in the back corner and ordered a whiskey, my fingers drumming impatiently on the tabletop as I waited. It wasn't long before I spotted David walking in. He looked uneasy, glancing around nervously until his eyes landed on me. I watched as he hesitated, clearly debating whether or not to turn around and leave. But he knew better. He knew there was no escaping this. David made his way over to the table, his expression a mix of guilt and fear. He sat down across from me, avoiding eye contact as he ordered a drink. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Finally, he cleared his throat and looked at me. "Rob, I save it," I snapped, cutting him off. "I'm not here for excuses, David. I want the truth. How long has this been going on?" He looked down at his hands, clearly uncomfortable. It's not what you think," he stammered. "Not what I think?" I repeated, incredulous. "I saw you, David. I saw you with my wife. So don't tell me it's not what I think." He winced at the word wife, as if it physically hurt him to hear it. "It just happened," he mumbled. "We didn't plan it, I swear." I leaned forward, my voice low and menacing. "How long, David?" He hesitated, and for a moment I thought he might actually lie to my face. But then he sighed, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "A couple of months," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. We reconnected at that reunion, and things just escalated. A couple of months. The words echoed in my head, making me feel sick. All those times she'd come home late, all those unexplained absences it had all been for him. My so-called friend. I felt my hands curl into fists under the table. "Did you sleep with her?" David looked up at me, his eyes filled with regret. He didn't need to say anything. The look on his face was answer enough. "You bastard," I whispered, my voice trembling with rage. "You slept with my wife." "Rob, I'm sorry," he said quickly, his voice desperate. "I never meant for it to go this far. It was a mistake. We both know that now." "A mistake?" I hissed, my anger boiling over. "You think this was just some fucking mistake? You think you can just apologize and make it all better?" I could see him shrink back in his seat, clearly intimidated by my fury. Good. I wanted him to be afraid. I wanted him to understand the depth of his betrayal. "I trusted you, David," I continued, my voice growing louder. "I trusted you with my friendship, my life, and you repay me by fucking my wife behind my back?" He shook his head, his eyes pleading. "Rob, I know I've messed up, but I am begging you, please, let's not make this worse. Let's talk it out. Maybe we can find a way to move past this." I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head in disbelief. "Move past this? How the hell do you think we move past something like this?" He had no answer. He just sat there, looking like a broken man while I seethed with anger and pain. I wanted to hurt him, to make him feel even a fraction of what I was feeling. But as I stared at him, I realized that no matter what I did, it wouldn't change anything. The damage was done. Suddenly I felt exhausted, like all the fight had drained out of me. I downed the rest of my drink and stood up, tossing some bills on the table. "This isn't over," I said quietly, my voice firm. "But for now, I am done." David looked up at me, fear flickering in his eyes. "Rob, please, Dante," I warned, cutting him off once more. "Just Dante." With that, I turned and walked out of the bar, leaving him sitting there with the weight of his guilt. As I stepped into the cool night air, I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The confrontation had gone exactly how I expected, hollow, unsatisfying, and ultimately pointless. But it wasn't the end, not by a long shot. There was one more person who needed to feel the full force of what she'd done, and I was going to make sure Sarah knew exactly what she had thrown away. When I got back home, the house felt emptier than ever. The shadows seemed longer, the silence more oppressive. But I didn't have time to dwell on it. There was something I needed to do, something that had been eating away at me since I walked out of that bar. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the blank sheet of paper in front of me. I had always been better with words on paper than spoken, and right now I needed to put everything I was feeling into something tangible, something Sarah couldn't ignore. I picked up the pen and began to write. "Sarah, I don't even know where to begin. Maybe that S, because I'm not sure I understand how we got here. Just a few days ago, I thought we were still on the same path, still moving forward together. But now, everything feels shattered, like I've been living in some kind of lie that I didn't even know I was a part of. I keep thinking about that day when I saw you with him. How casual it seemed, how easy it was for you to take off your ring, as if it meant nothing. It made me realize that somewhere along the line I lost you, and I didn't even see it happening. You told me it was a mistake, a one-time thing. But how am I supposed to believe that? How can I trust anything you say now when you've already broken the most important promise you ever made to me? Our vows were supposed to mean something, Sarah. They were supposed to be unbreakable. You know what the worst part is? I still love you. Even after everything, even after the betrayal, I can just turn off my feelings. And that makes this so much harder because all I want to do is hate you. It would be easier if I could, but I can tee. Maybe that is why I am writing this letter instead of talking to you in person. Because I'm not ready to see you again. Not when I am still feeling this way. I don't know how to look at you without seeing everything we've lost, everything you threw away. I need time. Time to figure out what this all means. Time to decide if there's anything left to salvage. But I want you to know this. I'm not going to let you walk away from this without feeling the consequences. You hurt me in a way I never thought possible, and I'm not just going to pretend like it didn't happen. So here's the deal. I need you to stay away from me for a while. No calls, no texts, nothing. I need to clear my head, and I can do that with you trying to reach out to me. When I am ready, I'll contact you. But until then, I want you to think long and hard about what you've done, about what you've destroyed. I don't know what the future holds for us. Maybe we can find a way to rebuild, or maybe this is the end. I just don't know right now. But I need you to respect my wishes and give me the space I need. Maybe then, when the dust settles, we can figure out where we go from here. Chiyuwai. I stared at the letter for a long time after I finished writing it, my hands shaking slightly. It was everything I wanted to say, everything I needed her to understand. But part of me wondered if it would make any difference at all. Could a letter really convey the depth of the pain I was feeling? Could it make her realize the gravity of what she had done? I folded the letter and slipped it into an envelope, sealing it shut with more force than necessary. Then, I walked outside, the cool night air brushing against my face, and slid the envelope into the mailbox. It felt final, like a door closing on a chapter of my life I hadn't expected to end. But as I stood there staring at the mailbox, I knew this was just the beginning of something new, something uncertain. I wasn't sure where this road would lead, but I knew I had to walk it. I had to find a way to reclaim my life, with or without Sarah. As I turned to head back inside, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, half expecting to see a message from Sarah even though I had told her not to contact me. But it wasn't her. It was a text from an unknown number. "You don't know what you're dealing with. Walk away before it's too late." I stared at the message, a cold chill running down my spine. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. And somehow, I knew that whatever was coming next, it was going to be even darker than I had imagined. That text shook me to my core. I stood there, phone in hand, rereading those words over and over, trying to make sense of them. It was cryptic, sure. But the meaning was clear. Someone wanted me to back off. But from what? Confronting Sarah? Dealing with David? The unknown was unsettling, and I wasn't the kind of person who reacted well to being threatened, especially not after everything I'd already been through. I walked back inside, locking the door behind me as if that would keep the threat out. My mind was racing. Who would send something like this? And why? My first thought was David. Maybe he was trying to scare me off, to make sure I didn't dig deeper into whatever had been going on between him and Sarah. But the more I thought about it, the less it made sense. David didn't have the guts for this kind of thing. He was a coward, not a mastermind. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself it was just some sick prank. But the uneasy feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. There was something more to this, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. That night, sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sarah with David, their kiss playing on an endless loop in my mind. And then there was the text, hanging over me like a dark cloud. What was I supposed to do with that? Ignore it? Report it? I wasn't even sure where to start. By morning, I was exhausted, but my mind was clearer. I decided I wasn't going to let some anonymous threat control me. If someone thought they could scare me into backing down, they were wrong. I wasn't the one who had done anything wrong here. I was the one who had been betrayed. If anything, I was the one who should be doing the threatening. But before I could figure out my next move, I needed to understand what I was dealing with. And that meant getting more information. I started by trying to trace the number that sent the text. But it was a dead end. Whoever sent it knew what they were doing. It was a burner phone, untraceable. That only made me more determined. If they were trying this hard to stay hidden, it meant there was something they didn't want me to find out. I decided to start with David. If he wasn't behind the text, maybe he knew something about it. Maybe he was involved in something deeper, something that had led him to Sarah in the first place. The thought made me sick, but I needed answers. I spent the rest of the morning gathering everything I knew about him: old emails, social media profiles, anything that might give me a clue about what he was up to. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Then, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront him directly this time. I needed leverage, something to make him talk, and I knew just the person who could help me get it. It wasn't easy, but I finally managed to track down an old friend from college who had gone into the private investigation business. Tom was good at what he did, and more importantly, he owed me a favor. I called him up, and after some awkward small talk, I explained the situation. I didn't go into too much detail. I wasn't ready to air all my dirty laundry just yet, but I told him enough to get him interested. "Look, Tom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I need you to dig into someone for me. His name is David Reynolds. I think he's involved in something, but I don't know what. I need to know everything you can find on him." Tom was silent for a moment, probably weighing the risks. "This sounds messy, Rob. Are you sure you want to do this?" "I don't have a choice," I replied, the desperation creeping into my voice. "I need answers." He sighed, but I could tell he was on board. "All right, I will see what I can do. But Rob, be careful. If this guy is as dangerous as you think, you are playing with fire." "I know," I said, clenching my fist. "Just find out what you can. I'll handle the rest." We hung up, and I was left with nothing to do but wait. The minutes dragged on like hours as I paced the house, my thoughts spiraling out of control. What if Tom uncovered something even worse than what I already knew? What if the threat was just the beginning? By the time Tom called back, it was late afternoon, and my nerves were shot. I answered on the first ring, practically holding my breath. "Rob, you were right to be suspicious," he said without preamble. I dug into David S. background, and it's not pretty. The guy has been in some deep shit for a while now, gambling, debt, shady business deals. But that's not the worst of it. My heart pounded in my chest. "What do you mean?" Tom hesitated, and I could tell he was trying to figure out the best way to break the news. "It looks like he's been involved with some pretty dangerous people, Rob. People who don't like it when things go wrong. My guess? They're the ones who sent you that text." A cold chill ran down my spine. "Are you saying Sarah got mixed up in this?" "I can say for sure," Tom replied. "But if she was involved with David, there's a good chance she got pulled into his mess. Whether she knows the full extent of it, I don't know. But these guys, they don't mess around." I sank into a chair, my mind reeling. This was so much bigger than I had imagined. It wasn't just about an affair anymore. It was about something far more dangerous. "What do I do, Tom?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. There was a long pause before he answered. "Rob, you need to be careful. If these people are involved, you could be in real danger. My advice? Lay low for a while. Let me keep digging, see what else I can find. But whatever you do, don't to confront David again, not until we know more." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Okay, thanks, Tom. Take care of yourself, Rob," he said before hanging up. I sat there, staring at the phone in my hand, trying to process everything I had just heard. The weight of it all felt like it was crushing me. How had my life spiraled so far out of control? How had I gone from a simple, happy marriage to this? One thing was clear: I was in over my head, and if I wasn't careful, this whole situation could go from bad to worse. But I wasn't about to back down. Whoever these people were, whatever they wanted, they had made a mistake by coming after me. I was going to get to the bottom of this, no matter what it took. And if that meant going up against some dangerous people, then so be it. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The next few days were a whirlwind of anxiety and anticipation. I tried to go about my daily routine, but it was impossible to focus on anything other than what Tom had uncovered. My mind kept replaying our conversation, the words "dangerous people" echoing in my head. Who the hell had Sarah gotten involved with? And what did they want from me? I avoided Sarah like the plague. Every time my phone buzzed with a text or a call, I half expected it to be her, but she respected my request for space. At least, she did on the surface. But I knew Sarah too well. She wasn't the type to just give up, especially not when her back was against the wall. Tom was still digging for more information, but in the meantime, I needed to take action. I couldn't just sit around waiting for the other shoe to drop. If I was going to figure out what was really going on, I needed to see it for myself. That is how I found myself sitting in my car, parked down the street from David S.'s apartment late one night. It was a classic stakeout, the kind you see in old detective movies, but there was nothing glamorous about it. I was exhausted, running on coffee and nerves, but I couldn't afford to let my guard down. Not now. I had been watching David S.'s place for a few hours, and so far, nothing had happened. His car was parked out front, but there was no sign of him. The apartment complex was quiet, the kind of place where the walls were thin and the neighbors kept to themselves. Perfect for someone trying to hide. Just as I was about to call it a night, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. My heart jumped into my throat as I watched David emerge from the building, looking around nervously before heading to his car. He didn't see me, and I slouched lower in my seat, praying he wouldn't notice my car parked a few spaces down. David got into his car and pulled out of the parking lot, and I hesitated for only a moment before starting my engine and following him at a distance. I kept the headlights off until I was sure I was far enough behind, doing my best to blend into the sparse traffic on the road. Wherever he was going, he was in a hurry. He drove faster than I expected, weaving in and out of lanes like he was trying to lose someone. Maybe he was just paranoid, or maybe he had a reason to be. Either way, I wasn't going to let him slip away. I tailed him across town, through a series of back streets and alleys that I'd never even noticed before. The neighborhood was rougher, the kind of place you didn't want to be caught alone at night. What the hell was he doing here? Finally, David pulled into the parking lot of an old, run-down warehouse, the kind that had been abandoned years ago and was now covered in graffiti and broken windows. My pulse quickened as I parked a safe distance away, cutting the engine and watching him from the shadows. David got out of the car and walked toward the warehouse, glancing over his shoulder nervously. I could see the tension in his movements, the way his shoulders were hunched, his head down. He looked like a man on the edge, desperate and afraid. As he approached the entrance, a figure stepped out of the shadows. I couldn't make out much in the darkness, but it was clear this wasn't a friendly meeting. The two of them exchanged a few words, their voices too low for me to hear. But I could tell by David's body language that things weren't going well. The figure moved closer, and I saw David flinch, like he was being threatened. My stomach twisted into knots. This was more than just some casual hookup gone wrong. David was in serious trouble, and by extension, so was Sarah. I didn't know what to do. My instinct was to get out of the car and confront them, to demand answers, but I knew that would only make things worse. I was out of my depth here, dealing with forces I didn't understand. If these people were as dangerous as Tom suggested, I needed to be smart. So, I waited. The conversation seemed to grow more heated, and at one point, I saw David raise his hands in what looked like a pleading gesture. The figure responded by shoving him hard against the wall of the warehouse, and I had to bite down on the urge to intervene. I was too far away to hear what was being said, but the body language told me everything I needed to know. David was in over his head, and he was about to drown. After a few tense minutes, the figure finally backed off, leaving David slumped against the wall, looking utterly defeated. The other man, or whoever he was, disappeared back into the shadows, leaving David to stagger back to his car. I watched as David sat in his car for a long time, his head resting on the steering wheel. I could only imagine what was going through his mind. Fear, regret, maybe even thoughts of running away. But in the end, he just started the engine and drove off, his taillights fading into the distance. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Whatever had just gone down, it was bad, and if David was involved, then Sarah was likely caught in the crossfire. I needed to get out of there before anyone noticed I was watching. But as I turned the key in the ignition, my phone buzzed. My heart stopped when I saw the message on the screen. "You should have walked away. Now it's too late." I whipped my head around, scanning the area, but there was no one in sight. How did they know I was here? How closely were they watching me? A surge of panic gripped me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I couldn't afford to lose it now. I needed to get out of there and figure out my next move. I drove home in a daze, the adrenaline finally wearing off and leaving me drained. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my mind was spinning with possibilities. Who had sent that message? How much did they know about me? And what was I going to do about it? As I sat in the car trying to catch my breath, a terrifying thought crossed my mind. What if this wasn't just about David? What if they were watching Sarah too? What if she was in more danger than I realized? I needed to protect her, even if I wasn't ready to forgive her. But first, I had to find out who was pulling the strings behind the scenes. Because one thing was clear: if I didn't get to the bottom of this soon, it wouldn't just be my marriage that was destroyed, it could be our lives. I didn't sleep that night. Every noise in the house made me jump. Every shadow seemed darker, more menacing. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that whoever had sent those texts was out there, lurking, waiting for me to make a wrong move. It felt like I was living in a nightmare, and the worst part was, I had no idea how to wake up from it. By morning, I was running on fumes, but I knew I couldn't keep avoiding the inevitable. Sarah was involved in this somehow, whether she realized it or not, and I needed to confront her. If she was in danger, I had to know. And if she had put me in danger, well, I needed to know that too. I grabbed my phone and texted her, keeping it simple. "We need to talk. Now." She replied almost immediately, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. "Okay, I'll be there in 20 minutes. The drive to the park was short, but it felt like an eternity. It was a place we used to go when we wanted to talk about serious things, neutral ground. Public enough to avoid any scene, but private enough to have a real conversation. I parked the car and sat there for a moment, gathering my thoughts, trying to prepare myself for whatever was about to happen. Sarah's car pulled up a few minutes later, and I watched as she got out, her face pale and drawn. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept either. There was no trace of the woman who had casually kissed another man and taken off her wedding ring. She looked broken, and that scared me more than anything. She walked over to where I was sitting on a bench and hesitated before sitting down beside me, keeping a few inches of space between us. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. We just stared ahead at the empty playground, the swings swaying slightly in the breeze. Finally, I broke the silence. "Who are they, Sarah?" She didn't pretend not to understand. She knew exactly what I was asking. Her hands twisted nervously in her lap, and she let out a shaky breath. "I don't know all the details," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I know enough to know that we are in trouble." My jaw clenched as I tried to keep my voice steady. "Tell me everything." She swallowed hard and nodded, as if she had been expecting this moment and dreading it at the same time. "It started after that reunion, when I saw David again. I don't know why I let it happen, Rob. Maybe I was lonely. Maybe I was bored, but I got caught up in something I didn't understand." "Something you didn't understand?" I repeated, my anger bubbling to the surface. "You mean like cheating on me with your ex?" She flinched at my words, but didn't argue. "Yes, that. But it wasn't just about the affair. David, he was different, Rob. He wasn't the guy I remembered from college. He was into something dark, something dangerous. But by the time I realized it, it was too late." "What the hell does that mean, Sarah?" I demanded, my patience wearing thin. She closed her eyes, as if trying to find the courage to continue. "He owes people money, Rob. A lot of money. Gambling debts, loans, who knows what else. And the people he owes, they are not the kind of people you can just walk away from. They found out about us, about me, and now they think they can use me to get to you." I stared at her, my mind reeling. "Use you to get to me? Why the hell would they come after me?" "Because they think you have something they want," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't know what it is, but David must have told them something that made them think you are the key to getting him out of this mess. I didn't know what to do, Rob. I tried to break things off with David, but they wouldn't let me. They threatened me, said they'd come after you if I didn't cooperate." The weight of her words hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just an affair. It wasn't just about betrayal. It was about survival. And suddenly all those cryptic texts, all those threats started to make sense. "They've been watching me, haven't they?" I asked, my voice cold and hard. She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Yes, and I think they are watching me too. I don't know what they want, Rob, but I'm scared. I'm scared for you, for us." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I saw the fear and regret etched into her features. She wasn't just guilty, she was terrified, and that terrified me too. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" I asked, my voice softening just a bit. "Because I was ashamed," she whispered, tears streaming down her face now. "I knew I'd hurt you, that I'd betrayed you in the worst possible way, and I didn't know how to fix it. I thought maybe I could handle it on my own, keep you out of it. But it just got worse, and now I don't know what to do." For a moment, I didn't know what to do either. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to throw her betrayal back in her face. But another part of me, the part that had loved her for so long, wanted to comfort her, to protect her from the mess she had created. But I knew that protecting her wasn't going to be enough. Whoever these people were, they were dangerous, and they weren't going to stop until they got what they wanted. And as much as it hurt, I knew I couldn't do this alone. "Sarah," I said finally, my voice firm, "we need to go to the police." She shook her head violently, panic flashing in her eyes. "No, we can't do that. You don't understand, they have connections. If we go to the police, they'll find out, and then we'll be in even more danger." "Then what do you suggest we do?" I asked, frustration creeping back into my voice. She looked down at her hands, her fingers trembling. I don't know, she admitted. But we can involve the police. We need to figure out what they want and find a way to get them off our backs. I wanted to argue, to insist that going to the authorities was the only way to get out of this. But the fear in her eyes stopped me. She was right about one thing: these people were dangerous, and they were playing by their own rules. For now, I needed to play along, to buy us some time while I figured out our next move. But deep down, I knew this was only going to get worse before it got better. And as much as I hated to admit it, I wasn't sure we were going to come out of this in one piece. I took a deep breath and reached for her hand, surprising both of us. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with confusion and something else, hope, maybe? I didn't know, but I needed her to understand that we were in this together, whether I liked it or not. We'll figure it out, I said, squeezing her hand. But you have to be honest with me from now on, Sarah. No more secrets, no more lies. If we are going to get through this, we need to be on the same page. She nodded, a small sob escaping her lips. I promise, Rob. I am so sorry. I let go of her hand and stood up, needing to put some distance between us. Sorry is not going to fix this, I said quietly. But it is a start. She didn't say anything, just watched as I turned and walked back to my car, leaving her sitting alone on the bench. My mind was racing with possibilities, plans, and backup plans. But one thing was clear: we were in deep, and there was no easy way out. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw her still sitting there, a small, fragile figure in the distance. I wanted to believe that we could get through this, that we could find a way to make things right. But deep down, I knew that the worst was yet to come. Driving home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was sinking deeper into quicksand. The more I struggled, the faster I was being pulled under. Sarah's confession had only confirmed what I feared: this situation was bigger than just us, and it was spiraling out of control. But I wasn't about to let these people, whoever they were, destroy my life without a fight. When I got home, the house was as empty and silent as it had been the past few days. But the silence didn't feel as oppressive this time. It felt like the calm before the storm. I paced the living room, trying to piece together everything I knew, every bit of information I'd gathered. I needed a plan, something concrete, something that would get us out of this mess without ending up dead or worse. I grabbed my phone and dialed Tom. He answered on the second ring, his voice gruff but alert. Rob, what's going on? We need to talk, I said, my voice tight with urgency. It's about Sarah. She's involved in this deeper than I thought, and it is worse than either of us imagined. There was a pause on the other end, and I could almost hear Tom weighing the situation. All right, meet me at my office in an hour. We'll figure this out. I agreed and hung up, feeling a surge of relief. Tom was the only person I could trust right now, and I needed his expertise. But I couldn't rely on him alone. I needed to take some action myself, something to gain the upper hand. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same place where I had written that letter to Sarah. But this time, I wasn't writing a letter, I was making a list. Everything I knew, every detail, every possible lead. I jotted down names, places, connections that seemed insignificant, but could be the key to unraveling this whole nightmare. David was the weak link. If anyone knew what these people wanted, it was him. But confronting him directly was out of the question. He was scared, desperate, and unpredictable. No, I needed to approach this from a different angle, one that would force him to talk without putting me at risk. I thought about the warehouse, the shadowy figure who had threatened David. Whoever they were the muscle behind this operation. And if they were watching me, as Sarah had implied, then I needed to make them think I was playing along, biding my time. An idea began to form in my mind, risky and dangerous, but it was the only one I had. I would stage a meeting with David, but not in the way they expected. I would give them just enough to think they were still in control, while secretly gathering the information I needed to turn the tables. I grabbed my phone again and called David, my heart pounding as I waited for him to answer. He picked up after a few rings, his voice tense. Rob, what's going on? David, we need to talk. But not over the phone, I said, keeping my voice calm. We need to meet in person. somewhere safe. There was a pause, and I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end. I don't know, Rob. This whole thing is getting out of hand. I know it is, I replied, trying to sound reassuring. That's why we need to meet. I think I've figured out a way to get us both out of this, but I need you to trust me. Trust you? David echoed, a note of disbelief in his voice. After everything that happened? You don't have a choice, David, I said bluntly. If you want to stay alive, you'll meet me. I am giving you one chance to fix this. He hesitated, and I could tell he was weighing his options. Finally, he sighed. All right. Where and when? I gave him a location, a small, secluded park on the outskirts of town, and a time. Come alone, I added, my voice firm, and Don to do anything stupid. He agreed, and we hung up. I felt a rush of adrenaline, knowing that I had just set the wheels in motion. But this wasn't just about confronting David, it was about setting a trap, one that would force the people behind this to reveal themselves. I grabbed my jacket and keys, ready to head out to meet Tom. But before I left, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I grabbed the small handgun I kept locked away in the back of my closet. I wasn't sure I'd be able to use it if it came down to it, but I wasn't about to go into this situation unarmed. When I arrived at Tom's office, he was already waiting for me, his expression grim. He motioned for me to sit down, and I did, feeling the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on me. So, what is the plan? Tom asked, leaning back in his chair, his eyes sharp. I took a deep breath and laid it all out for him, everything Sarah had told me, everything I knew about David and his involvement with these dangerous people. Tom listened carefully, his face growing more serious with every word. This is bad, Rob, he said when I finished. These guys aren't just your average thugs. If they are willing to go this far, they're not going to back down easily. You need to be prepared for whatever happens. I know, I replied, feeling the tension in my chest tighten. But I can just sit around and wait for them to come after me. I need to take control of this situation. Tom nodded, his expression thoughtful. You're right, but we need to be smart about this. If you're going to meet David, you need to make sure you're not walking into a trap yourself. That's why I need your help, I said, leaning forward. I'm meeting David tomorrow night, but I need to make sure we're not being watched. And if things go south, I need you to be ready to step in. Tom considered this for a moment, then nodded. All right, I'll have eyes on the place, and I'll make sure you are covered. But Rob, you need to be careful. This could get ugly fast. I am counting on it, I said, a grim smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. I am done playing their game. It's time to end this. We spent the next hour going over the details, planning every possible scenario. Tom assured me he would have backup ready in case things went wrong, but I knew I couldn't rely on him alone. I had to be ready for anything. When I left his office, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the street. I felt a strange sense of calm, like the storm was finally about to break. I didn't know what was going to happen tomorrow, but I knew one thing for sure: I was ready. As I drove home, I thought about Sarah, about everything we had been through. I wasn't sure if we could ever go back to the way things were, if we could rebuild what had been shattered. But I knew that before we could even think about that, we had to survive this. And that meant taking down whoever was behind this once and for all. Tomorrow everything would come to a head. Tomorrow the game would end, one way or another.